The Assembly will continue its consideration of Agenda Item 8, entitled General Debate. I now give the floor to His Excellency Bassam Sabag, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. I congratulate you on your election as President of the General Assembly at its current session, and I thank your predecessor, His Excellency Dennis Francis, for presiding over the previous session. I also thank the Secretary General for the efforts exerted to fulfill his mandate under the United Nations Charter. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, as this session of the General Assembly is taking place, tensions internationally have reached a boiling point, and efforts to maintain international peace and security are confronted with real challenges and threats. Clashes are intensifying, crises are multiplying, conflicts are escalating, chaos is spreading, terrorism is gaining ground, the global economy is faltering, poverty rates are rising, climate change is accelerating, and development indicators are lagging. These are the unfortunate results of 8 decades of multilateral action that have followed the establishment of the United Nations. While we previously sought to promote preventive diplomacy and the peaceful settlement of disputes, we are witnessing today more direct wars and proxy wars waged using terrorist tools. And instead of harnessing scientific advancement for the benefit and well-being of all people, we are witnessing disgraceful use of modern technologies as deadly tools to sow death and destruction. Instead of investing efforts and resources in achieving sustainable development for all, some are flagrantly draining the resources of other countries, stealing from their people, and imposing unilateral coercive measures that impoverish and destroy nations. Mr. President, for more than a decade, Syria has experienced unparalleled suffering. It fell victim to a fierce terrorist war, direct attacks on its territories that continue to this day, a multifaceted and stifling economic blockade and an unprecedented political and media incitement campaigns. Billions of dollars were spent to erode the development progress that Syria has worked over decades to achieve. Billions more were spent to spread chaos and undermine security and stability, and to force millions of Syrians to leave their homes, only to become internally displaced or refugees in other countries. Ladies and gentlemen, nevertheless, rest assured that despite everything, we have remained faithful to our strong beliefs, our firm positions, and to the choices we made as a nation. Syria never hesitated to protect and defend its people and never faltered in its war on terrorism. Economic hardships did not prevent us from meeting the needs of our people. All that has happened has revealed the true intentions of the collective West, which completely contradict with the principles and purposes that form the pillars and foundation and function of this international organization. Mr. President, the ongoing Israeli occupation of Arab territory since 1967, including the Syrian Arab Golan, and the genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity it commits are a glaring example of the failure of this organization, and namely the Security Council, to end this expansionist and racist occupation and the ongoing aggression. It is a damning proof that the United States has prevented the Council from fulfilling its responsibility to confront threats to international peace and security. Since the 7th of October 2023, the Israeli occupation has continued to commit bloody and terrorist crimes, adding another chapter to its 7-decade-long criminal record. Over the past months, the occupying forces and settler gangs have been carrying out a savage aggression on the Palestinian people and committing a genocide before the eyes of the whole world, which has claimed the lives of more than 42,000 Palestinians, most of whom are children and women. The Syrian Arab Republic strongly condemns the Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people and renew its solidarity with the legitimate struggle to liberate their occupied land and establish their independent state on their entire national territory, with Jerusalem as its capital, while ensuring the right of the Palestinian refugees to return to their homeland in line with international law and relevant UN resolutions. Syria also condemns all attempts to liquidate UNRWA and suspend the services it provides to Palestinians on their land and in neighboring countries. We stress the need to hold Israel accountable for its direct targeting of more than 200 personnel working for UNRWA and other UN and humanitarian agencies. In an attempt to cover the failure of its war against the Palestinian people and to escape its internal crisis, the Israeli occupying forces implicate others in their internal crises and distract from the failed war against the Palestinian people. Hence, they have chosen to drag the region into a serious escalation while benefiting from the immunity, impunity, and unlimited support provided by certain countries, in particular the U.S., in a clear case of hypocrisy and double standards. Israeli forces have scaled up their attacks on countries in the region, including my country, Syria, targeting vital civilian facilities, residential buildings, and even diplomatic premises, resulting in the death of dozens of civilians, significant material damage, and hindering the delivery of humanitarian aid to Syrians. On the 27th of July 2024, Israeli occupying forces committed another heinous crime against our people in the occupied Syrian Golan when they targeted the Syrian town of Majd al-Shams, claiming the lives of 12 Syrian children. The criminal Israeli forces went even further, blaming others for this tragedy and exploiting the death of innocent Syrians for propaganda purposes. The open Israeli aggression has also extended to our brotherly Lebanon. 2 weeks ago, the Israeli occupation authorities committed an unprecedented crime against the Lebanese by using the means of communication as a tool to kill unarmed civilians in a collective manner. A few days ago, the Israeli occupation authorities targeted the southern suburb of Beirut with a treacherous and cowardly aggression, destroying an entire residential block using tons of explosive bombs to assassinate Hezbollah Secretary General Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, who for more than 3 decades led an honorable Lebanese national resistance against the Israeli occupation. This large-scale Israeli aggression, which is unfettered by any restrictions and limitations, is pushing the region to the brink of a dangerous escalation and confrontation whose consequences cannot be predicted and causing disastrous effects on peace and security, not only in our region, but also beyond it. The Syrian Arab Republic calls on all member states of the United Nations to work towards ending the Israeli aggression against Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, and hold the occupation authorities accountable for their crimes, as well as prevent impunity. The Syrian Arab Republic reiterates that the Golan is an occupied Syrian territory and that its inhabitants are Syrian Arab citizens who are and will always be an integral part of the people of Syria. They have struggled over decades against the occupation. Syria stresses that regaining the full Syrian occupied Golan line with the UN Resolution 242, 338, and 497 is an inalienable right and shall never be subject to compromise and will never be affected by the passage of time or be subject to the statute of limitation. Mr. President, the crimes and attacks of the Israeli occupying forces against Syria cannot be seen in separation from the subversive role played by certain Western countries, especially the U.S., the United States of America, corrects the interpreter. In my country, Syria, these countries have continued to violate Syria's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity by illegally deploying their military forces inside Syria's territory, allowing their officials to sneak into Syria and supporting separatist militia and terrorist groups. These countries have also worked to exacerbate the humanitarian situation of the Syrian people by depriving them of the benefit of the resources as a result of their systematic looting of Syria's national riches, as well, and by imposing inhumane, unilateral, coercive measures whose disastrous effects have affected all aspects of the daily lives of Syrians. These measures targeted various vital sectors, most notably the public health sector, energy sector, banks, financial transactions and transfers, transport, as well as the agriculture sector that has been affected by these measures that has led to reduced levels of food security. All the unfounded allegations made by Western countries to justify such illegal measures and to deny or downplay their catastrophic impacts have been laid bare in multiple recent UN reports. In this regard, my country reiterates its call for the immediate, full, and unconditional lifting of unilateral coercive measures as they amount to a collective punishment of the people and a form of economic terrorism and a flagrant violation of the UN Charter and international law. Mr. President, since the beginning of the terrorist war on my country, Syria, the Syrian government has responsibly and constructively engaged with all initiatives aimed at preserving Syria's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, protecting its people from terrorism, improving the living conditions of Syrians. Many measures have been taken to that end, which can be summed up as follows. 1. Mobilizing all efforts to eradicate terrorist groups that are enlisted by the Security Council and putting an end to their dark thinking, extremist ideology, practices based on killing, torture, enforced disappearance, restriction of freedom, recruitment of children, discrimination, and violence against women and girls. The Syrian government continues to confront the remaining organizations to end the suffering of Syrians, and we call upon all countries to repatriate their citizens currently detained in illegal centers in northeastern Syria to end and close them due to the danger they pose to them in the future. 2. Pursuing national reconciliation and local settlement agreements, where 23 amnesty decrees have been issued, which facilitated the social reintegration of those who had lost their way. The most recent of these was Legislative Decree number 27 of 22 September 2024. 3. Supporting humanitarian access by granting the UN multiple authorizations to use 3 border crossings to deliver humanitarian assistance to eligible Syrian civilians in northwest Syria, and by granting the necessary approvals for humanitarian deliveries from inside Syria, despite all of the attempts by terrorist groups to obstruct humanitarian access and steal or divert the aid. 4. Continuing the efforts of the Syrian state institutions to enhance their role and increase their efficiency by holding on time all constitutionally mandated entitlements and following up on the process of economic and administrative development and reform, and moving forward with efforts to modernize legislative structures, including those related to strengthening the rule of law, developing media work, social protection programs, and empowering women, protecting the rights of children and persons with disability, as well as implementing the strategic plan for gender equality and developing legislation regulating conscription. 5. Sparing no effort to support the dignified return of refugees and displaced people to their areas. An agreement was reached with the Office of UNHCR on several measures which are being implemented accurately. Discussions are also underway with a number of neighboring countries to launch innovative projects that allow the provision, which would be a model to assist and facilitate the return and accelerate it. 6. Openly engaging with all the efforts and initiatives made at the political level, including we have been taking part in the Astana meetings, which have achieved concrete results. The Syrian government is also in constant contact with the UN Special Envoy for Syria and is cooperating with him in line with his mandated role as a facilitator of a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process. 7. Committing to dialogue and diplomacy as a basis to a course for correcting relations with other countries. The Syrian government has positively engaged with the various initiatives put forward in this regard, in line with our firm belief that the interests of countries must be built on sound relations based on specific principles and clear grounds to achieve the desired objectives. In particular, mutual respect for state sovereignty and territorial unity, joint action to address threats to security and stability, and pursuing common interests without interfering in internal affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, as Syria is healing from the wounds of what it's been exposed and subjected to, it looks to the future with a sense of hope and optimism. However, the success of its efforts necessarily requires the collective West to stop politicizing humanitarian work and linking it to political conditionality. Donors need to fulfill their pledges in humanitarian funding and provide sustainable solutions for livelihoods and supporting resilience, including by working to strengthen early recovery projects and increase and the immediate, complete, and unconditional lifting of unilateral coercive measures. Mr. President, Syria reiterates its demand for a Middle East zone free of weapons of mass destruction, in particular nuclear weapons, and to compel Israel to eliminate its arsenal of weapons of mass destruction, join relevant international treaties and conventions, and place its installations under an international monitoring. Syria expresses its support and solidarity with Arab countries, especially those facing challenging circumstances resulting from foreign interference, natural events, or climate change. Syria reiterates its support to the right of the Russian Federation to defend itself and to maintain its national security in response to the West's hostile policies and in rejection of the logic of hegemony and unipolarism. Syria also condemns the attempts to confiscate Russian financial assets. Syria expresses once again its full support to the Islamic Republic of Iran and its legitimate right to defend its national security and the peaceful use of nuclear energy, and we commend Iran's constructive and responsible approach in this regard. Syria renews its support to the One China principle and the stances of the People's Republic of China as it faces external attempts to interfere in its internal affairs and deems it necessary to defend its sovereignty and confront defend its sovereignty. Syria condemns the decades-long U.S. economic embargo on Cuba and rejects the issuance of the infamous list called the countries sponsoring terrorism. Syria calls for an end to the U.S. military drills and exercises on the Korean Peninsula as they contribute to raising tensions in this region. My country reiterates its solidarity with Venezuela in the face of the flagrant interference in its internal affairs and the hostile policies against it. Syria calls for the immediate lifting of all unilateral coercive measures imposed by Western countries on Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Belarus, Cuba, Nicaragua and the DPRK and Eritrea and others, as well as on my country, Syria. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to call on the countries of the world to summon the courage and make the right choice to guarantee a better present and future for present and future generations and save humanity from the scourge of all-out wars looming on the horizon by supporting the establishment of a more just and balanced through the reform of political and financial institutions to end the state of hegemony and unipolarity and better attempts to undermine the Charter of the UN and replace it with a so-called rules-based order. The Syrian Arab Republic, while looking forward to the current session of the General Assembly under your leadership to be able to fulfill the promise of its theme. We stress that success in translating this theme into a practical reality requires abandoning the policies of hegemony, exclusion, blockade, and collective punishment of peoples, and adhering to the Charter of Organization and respecting international law, multilateral diplomacy, and granting developing countries equal opportunities to advance their societies and achieve well-being, prosperity, and sustainable development for their peoples. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Syrian Arab Republic. I now give the floor to His Excellency Ludwig Valdrak Ludwig Gentke Wataka, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nicaragua.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ministers, representatives, after hearing so much analysis, the description of so much misfortune, so many calamities, and after hearing detailed descriptions of the Holocaust that afflict us as a human family, after watching so much intelligence sparkle before our eyes, we are left in silence, contemplating the void, because whilst we have knowledge, or whilst we think we have knowledge, we do not find, we cannot detect common responses to the weaknesses and pains that beset our society. There are no responses being found to the abuses, aberrations, the aggressions of global powers, to the unjust global order that from every angle seems to increasingly suffocate us. And that is happening in spite of our knowledge, our experience, and the spirit that we have as human beings, the spirit that we must nourish to better light our way forward. The tragedies of injustice, supremacist ambitions, the perverse appetites for domination, subjugation, and barbarism were those seen in the worst times that were known as periods of colonization or conquest. These phenomena seem to be worsening, keeping humankind perpetually enslaved to the basest sentiments, avarice, greed, and the imposition of models by some on others. This is all causing us to stray further and further from the principles and values of equality and rights that, with sweat and tears, humanity and intelligence thought they had won. Disaster after disaster, we continue to sow war as the savage MO of imperialism and capitalism. They too are savage, barbaric, and fierce, and we're walking towards the extinction of all human beings. We are refusing to accept that only peace can triumph. That is true because peace is justice. Peace is peaceful coexistence. Peace is respectful cooperation. It is the furtherance of freedom, dignity, and the sovereignty of all peoples. those philosophies, those principles will guarantee that we can live a life better than ever before. But today, peace stands before us as one of the most distant illusions. We're not on a journey to peace. And incidentally, we're not acquainting ourselves with this just and lasting peace that could place us on a path towards a world of brotherhood, happiness and solidarity. Every morning, in so many corners of our planet, we wake up to death and more death. We wake up to people being sacrificed on the bonfires of the insipid supposed superiority of some over others. We wake up before killings and massacres which should mark the consciences of warlords, magnates, and those that traffic in apocalyptic wars. These wars are imposed on some people and by some people on others, and they lay waste to beings, cultures, lands. They crucify, and they do all of this to ensure that life meets their tastes, whims and interests. In these daily massacres, how much do we lose, particularly when it comes to the most deeply rooted human emotions that we have: love, brotherhood and hope? These are values that human beings seem to be casting aside. These values are undoubtedly victims of the hell that they sell to us as a heaven, victims of the satanic kings that dismiss the tragedies they visit upon us, and in so doing they forget the core principle of civilization, which should be power enjoyed by all for the good of all of us. Every day we lose heart, we lose our soul, not because we sell it to the devil and his satanic underlings, but rather because our generations that should have learnt so much from the millions of human beings that have sacrificed throughout history on the bonfires of vanity and ambitions, these people are the victims of deadly selfishness, lessons that they failed to learn from. We forget all of that, and instead, enemies of peace try to convert the world into the most arid of deserts, spiritually arid. And we ignore all of this, and we fail to harness our human strength. We're faced with so much aggression, barbarism, attacks, crimes. Satanic assaults are being waged on all of us. Evil seems to be trumping good. But in the face of all of that, peoples are left, those peoples that know how to fight, peoples of culture, spiritual experience, and dignity and national decorum. That is our great asset. That is our most invaluable heritage. That is the kingdom of God on earth. This is the beginning, the dawning of a new world, which is being born, rising from the ashes of anguish, suffering and pain. All of these things have been imposed upon us by sick minds that do not see, do not wish to see the arrival of this other good world. They continue to try and live in the past, centuries past, for their own benefit. They try to stay living in the old and blood-soaked world. How much pain, how many battles, how many chains, how much in slavery are we going to suffer? Because on the other hand, we have our human condition that goes from strength to strength, from truth to truth. We're increasingly waking up to the truth. We show more and more courage, more and more valor, and every day in the face of suffering we enjoy more glory. We see more and more victories of the truth, and our human spirit is prevailing, just as it must. No one can strip us of our certainty of a new world. No one can deprive us of the reality of a brotherly world, a world of understanding, solidarity, and respectful cooperation in the present and for the well-being of all. In the old world designed by the conquistadores, those conquistadores will remain with their ambitions thwarted, sad and alone. They will be condemned and rejected by those of us that have learned to revere love, learned to root out hatred and what it imposes upon us. We've learned to bury humiliation, indignity, and we've learned to dismiss terror, the fear that they use to pressure us and intimidate us. those as the evil of the earth. We will never yield. We will never bow to the enemies of peace or the enemies of common good. We will never be enslaved by selfishness and avarice, and we will never be blind to the atrocities committed by those who sow the mendacious narrative of their hypocritical acolytes, those that use artificial techniques and tactics, and who use technicolor film to sell us a childish world, a fictional world that pretend to be blind, deaf and mute, paralyzed. And we will never bow to those that acquit those that are guilty of so many crimes against humanity. We will not be silent, ever. We denounce and condemn the genocide that the government of Israel and its First World allies have committed, commit, and continue to commit against the glorious people of Palestine, against the courageous people of Lebanon, and against so many other brave, valiant, dignified people. None of us will yield to brutality. We are not silent. We will never be silent. We denounce and condemn the aggressions against Syria, Iran, and against all other great peoples in their struggles. We stand with our brothers on all continents. We will never be silent. We denounce and condemn the occupation and hijacking of the rights of peoples such as Haiti. We are not silent. We will never be silent. We denounce and condemn the systematic policy of extermination of cultures and rights that colonial imperialist powers visit upon peoples, governments, and countries who, like Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, are members of the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of our America. ALBA. ALBA is a strategic unit with which we defend our sovereignty, independence, and legitimate models of institutions, our models of self-governance, and direct and participative democracy. We stand shoulder to shoulder with all countries and peoples affected by barbarism and the brutality which was unleashed and is being unleashed against our Mother Earth and our resources. That is causing what we know today as climate change. Climate change is none other than selfishness and the pillaging of our earthly resources. That pillaging has created myriad disasters, disasters which are not natural, disasters which require climate justice, disasters that have been imposed upon us by selfish slave masters, the pillagers of our world, the filibusterers. They've done all of that without regard for what we're losing, without compensation, redress, or reparation for what we've lost. We stand shoulder to shoulder in brotherliness, solidarity, in just struggles for food security, health security, education, rights, human security. These are all rights that we will never give up on. Of course, we are fighting an urgent daily struggle against terrorism in all its forms, against drug trafficking, organized crime, all vices and criminal activities that have been imposed upon us to weaken our institutions, models, and practices, and in order to increase interference into our ways of life. Those doing that are attempting to instill and establish ways of living which are not our own. They're seeking to, in so doing, create an image of us according to which we are incapable, mere beggars. We will never accept that model. There are invaders, those interventionists that are dressed in sheepskin, that have the faces of wolves, and to them we say, we are people rich in culture, resources, and community models. We are rich in values that have been distorted, slandered, or worn down. We will not allow ourselves to be converted into needy beggars, because we're not beggars, and will not allow you to pretend that we are just because you want to be falsely kind and generous. Your interests are patently clear, and you're using them to interfere in our own affairs. That's not only unacceptable, it's despicable and unbecoming. We have a right to our freedoms and the supreme dignity of our spirit and culture. We have a right to our own conscience and our own convictions. We are allowed to learn and continue on our humble pilgrimage, a pilgrimage that means that we learn from everyone. We're able to incorporate the good into how we live, to cast aside and reject everything that seeks to make us into servile machines divided by the strategies of the imperialists of the earth. We defend our highest dreams. We do so alongside Bolivar, Martí, Sandino, Morazán, and alongside so many great figures that preceded us. and led the way for our struggles so that we would win, vanquish, and triumph. Nothing is free in this world. We must become more aware, and our heart must grow bigger every day. We must be absolutely lucid, clear, and coherent in our action, because it is only the union of the peoples of the planet that will be able to vanquish the Earth's imperialists. It is only this union that will make them retreat, even though they continue to criminally machinate. And they do everything they can to distort us, but we will distort them. ALBA is a triumphant alliance, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with Chavez, Nicolas, and his great people. We are one with the Cuba of Fidel, Raúl, Miguel, and their dignified and fearless resistance. We are one with Bolivia and its laudable path forward. We are one with Honduras and its challenges. We are one with Mesoamerica and the challenges it faces. We are one with Asia, with the Arab peoples, with the peoples of that black Africa, the peoples that live among us. We are one with the Russian Federation in its major struggles against the beast of fascism, battles that we will win. About this, there can be no doubt. We are one with the People's Republic of China, a country that teaches us so much, that bestows upon us their wisdom and experience in developing their people's well-being. They bring to us lessons of global solidarity for a community of the future. We stand with all the fighters and warriors of the world, and with the strength and dignity that we've always had. And today, we will not allow ourselves to be crucified for these values. On the contrary, we will rise up with pride and happiness. We will fly our flags and standards proud, because we know that humanity and the human spirit must conquer all. We will prevail. It is only by prevailing that we will spread and preserve the highest, loftiest values of the humanity that we all inhabit. Our Nicaragua is blessed, dignified, always sovereign, Christian, socialist, solidarity-based, and from that Nicaragua, we embrace you all of you in this world that want peace, affection, respect, rights, and well-being. We will always stand together, and together we will go forward. We'll build upon the legacy of our victorious General Augusto Sandino, and we will do so with the poetry of our great Rubén Darío in mind. And here I quote, "A great flight of crows stains the blue sky. A 1,000-year-old breath threatens plague. In the Far East, men are being murdered. Has the apocalyptic Antichrist been born? Omens have been witnessed and wonders seen. The return of Christ seems imminent. The earth is pregnant with pain so deep that the dreamer, imperious, lost in thought, suffers all the anxieties of the heart of the world. Executioners of ideals afflict the earth, locking up humanity in a shadowy pit, along with the brutes of hatred and war. O Lord Jesus Christ, why do you take so long? Why wait to spread your hand of light over these wild beasts, and make your divine banners brilliant in the sun? It rises suddenly, pouring out life's essence over so many crazed, sad, or hardened souls, so in love with darkness as to forget your sweet dawn. Come, Lord, show us in all your glory. Come with trembling stars and the dread of cataclysm. Come bringing love and peace across the abyss. Let your white horse, which the visionary witnessed, come in, and let that divine extraordinary clarion sound, and may my heart be an ember of your swaying incense." Today we remember the Nicaraguan father, priest, ambassador of the dignity and decorum of our peoples, Miguel de Escoto Brockman. He fought, and he bequeathed upon us the responsibility to fight for the remodeling of the United Nations, so that the United Nations could serve the cause of debate and the struggle for justice, the right to harmony and happiness of the peoples. The United Nations as an instrument belonging precisely to nations themselves, an instrument to denounce, condemn, reject, and repudiate all abominations and aberrations perpetrated against all of us. It is an instrument to encourage good, affection, to root out evil, opprobrium, and hatred in our relations. Our relations, our ties, should be those of brotherly coexistence. Peoples of the world, go forward. The earth must be the paradise of all of humankind. The world will be different and better. That's what we're working for. That's why we are united. And that is what we believe in. Allow me to bring to you the affection of all of Nicaragua's people, that of President Commander Daniel Ortega and Vice President Rosario Murillo. Many thanks indeed.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Nicaragua. I now give the floor to His Excellency Osman Saleh Mohammed, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Eritrea.
Your Excellency Philemon Yang, President of the 79th Session of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Honorable Heads of Delegation, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, allow me to join previous speakers to congratulate Your Excellency for your election to the presidency of the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly. The current session is taking place at a crucial juncture of transition in the architecture of global governance. Before delving into the main subject, allow me to digress a bit and dwell on some historical perspectives. As it will be recalled, maintenance of global peace was indeed the overarching mantra and proclaimed objective when the League of Nations was established 1 century ago in January 1920 in the immediate aftermath of the First World War. But in spite of the lofty pronounced objectives, the League of Nations could not fully measure up to the noble task and deter the eruption of the Second World War. 25 years later, in October 1945, the United Nations was solemnly established to prevent another world war and guarantee durable global peace, but our global community was plunged into the era of the Cold War, whose hallmark was a controversial bipolar international world order. With all its dynamics and the deleterious consequences to global peace and stability, the Cold War era culminated after 45 years in 1991 in the collapse of the former Soviet bloc. As it happened, this later phase ushered in a new precarious epoch of the unipolar world order, which was in essence bereft of any new ideology. As a matter of fact, the new dispensation represented a retrograde relapse to and revival of centuries-old colonialism and slavery, indeed the resources and wealth of others were usurped to mollify the insatiable greed of the few through force and other tools of repression. The manifestations of this policy are myriad and include pronounced policies of containment by the architects and proponents of a unipolar world order in the European theater, and especially reckless acts in Ukraine. Provocative containment policies against China pursued in Asia for analogous objectives and considerations. Trends that these policies portend to global peace. In our neighborhood, the ramifications of this policy include the perilous war unleashed to stifle the Palestinian cause and evict them from their land, the commotion that it continues to engender, and the wider regional conflagration that it may trigger. Acts of subversion conducted and multiple crises fomented in several parts in Africa under various pretexts to preserve and maintain colonial slavery. Overt interventions carried out in the same manner in Latin America to install surrogate regimes. Various subterfuges conducted to stifle and roll back bargaining public protests in Europe and the United States against the backdrop of fragmentation of traditional coalitions. All these distressing developments and trends amplify the innate flaws and dysfunctionality of the reckless policies of the unipolar world order. Ladies and gentlemen, efforts exerted during the various epochs to imbue institutional structure and mandate to the global architecture were not ultimate aims and objectives in themselves. As it is indeed palpable, institutional formats are mere mechanisms and modalities for achieving the desired goals and objectives. Peace and stability constitute indispensable prerequisites for the promotion of prosperity and growth and the attainment of the ultimate human aspirations of justice and the prevalence of a just political order. In other words, the assertion and guaranteeing of a just global order where domination, deceit, coercion, and intimidation, plunder, and monopolization are not countenanced or tolerated. The unequivocal aspiration of the peoples of the world in the past 100 years were precisely the crystallization through the League of Nations and later the United Nations of a just global order. The perplexing question remains whether these lofty aspirations and profound wishes were achieved. The poignant answer is no, these have not been realized. On the other hand, the logical corollary to failure is not despondency, but redoubled and more vigorous commitment and resilience in order to achieve the cherished objectives and goals. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me now to revert to the predicament of the Eritrean people, which epitomizes in all respects the typical ordeal of numerous other peoples. 3 generations of Eritreans were doomed to pay precious and inordinately huge sacrifices for almost 80 years since the end of the Second World War, merely because the Dallas brothers determined that Eritrea does not serve United States strategic interests. As it happened, the people of Eritrea were compelled to wage political and armed struggle of liberation for 50 long years. And even when they achieved their hard-won independence in 1991, they were denied respite and the opportunity to funnel their energies for nation building. Indeed, the same hegemonic policy, consideration, and defunct ploys were ramped up to foment unremitting crisis and instability by instigating border conflicts and other ruses. the suffering and the economic damage that was inculcated, the opportunity loss incurred have been enormous by any standards. Still, and in the face of unwarranted onslaught, the resilience of the Eritrean people was not dampened, and yet the spiral of mindless hostility continued to intensify without let up. In 2009, Eritrea was subjected to sanctions on the basis of unsubstantiated and trumped-up charges. As it happened, the forces of hegemony plotted to further punish the people of Eritrea and invoked a preposterous pretext for a people and the countries that have waged a relentless struggle against terrorism and domination for decades. The sanctions were ultimately lifted in 2018, but the question remains, why was it imposed in the first place? Furthermore, it must be borne in mind that illicit unilateral sanctions, futile demonization campaigns, as well as subversive acts to instigate conflicts in the region still continue unabated. Ladies and gentlemen, the ordeals meted out to the people of Eritrea is only the tip of the iceberg. The tribulations imposed on other peoples in Africa, Latin America, Asia, Europe, and the Americas are severe indeed. In the event, we urge for the categorical lifting of the unilateral coercive measures and sanctions imposed on countries like Eritrea, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and Cuba, imposed including the 60 years long embargo against Cuba and its unjust placement on the dubious list of state sponsors of terrorism. Meanwhile, we need to pause and ask what is the relevance and impact of the fundamental principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter against the backdrop of the law of the jungle that the hegemonic powers are bent on imposing. This precarious reality amplifies the imperative and urgency for the peoples of the world to strive with higher vigor, fortitude, and enhanced solidarity than what has transpired for 100 years, to install a global order that guarantees peace and stability. This is not an opinion that can be left to circumstances. The forces of hegemony must also be made accountable for their crimes for the dispensation of justice. Let me conclude my brief address by reiterating our best wishes for success in our current endeavors. I thank you.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Eritrea. I now give the floor to His Excellency Bakari Yau Sangare, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Cooperation, and Nigerian abroad of the Niger.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Monsieur le Président.
Distinguished President, distinguished heads of state and government, distinguished heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen.
Je voudrais tout d'abord
At the outset, I would like to warmly congratulate Mr. Philemon Yang on his election as President of the 79th session of the UN General Assembly. I also would like to express to his predecessor, Mr. Dennis Francis of Trinidad and Tobago, my sincere thanks for his outstanding work during his mandate, despite the turbulent global context. Unfortunately, I will not go any further in my congratulations, and you'll understand why. Ladies and gentlemen, exactly 1 year ago, in this same hall, from this very same podium, my country, Niger, was unjustly and unjustifiably deprived of its right to speak. That wasn't the worst of it. This decision was debated at the time, but the worst was that at the same time, representatives from other countries in the same situation as we were authorized to speak. And they were even received with honors by the Secretary General of the United Nations. You can easily understand and agree with me that we're looking at double standards. Double standards that tarnish the credibility of our common organization. My country accepted that decision with dignity, but we did feel left behind. That is why my remarks today will focus on those left behind and on human dignity. Human dignity, ladies and gentlemen, is perfectly in keeping with the ideals behind our transformation in Niger. Those left behind, on the other hand, result from conflict, violence in many forms, inequality, and the lack of solidarity, as well as the marginalization of a large portion of the population of our planet, people who aspire for a better world. Before continuing, I would like to welcome into this session the presence of Palestine, which has been left behind. We hope that its presence, so richly deserved among us, will represent a decisive step toward the emergence of a free, independent, sovereign Palestinian state living in peace with its neighbors within the borders of 1967. Niger reaffirms its support to the Palestinian cause. We believe only a two-state solution can end the cycle of violence and can guarantee peace and security in the region. My country also laments the situation in Lebanon and calls for an immediate cessation of hostilities. Ladies and gentlemen, every year we engage in the ritual of lamenting the situation of poor countries and pleading for a more equitable world. But we're forced to observe that we are holding too many meetings and taking too little action. We are stagnating. Poor countries see what is happening. While they founder, the rich are lining their pockets with our resources, continuing to support corrupt and subservient regimes that rig elections and plunge their people into total suffering. Meanwhile, the international community stands aside in silent complicity, which once again demonstrates their double standards. Ladies and gentlemen, from this podium, I call upon the exploited peoples left behind, to tell them that it is not the affluent countries that will be finding solutions for us. I affirm that these solutions are within us. They consist in refusing to demean ourselves by begging for aid. They consist in building worthy partnerships in which our natural resources are paid for at the price that they deserve and benefits invested for a population. It is in this spirit that my country is using its own funds to address the damages and the humanitarian crisis caused by unprecedented flooding that occurred this year. We don't need any lessons about democracy. What's important is the interests, the choices, and the aspirations of our brave peoples. As stated by the President of the National Council for the Salvation of the Homeland and Head of State, His Excellency Brigadier General Abdurrahman Tiani, no state and no interstate organization shall dictate to my country what conduct to adopt, let alone its agenda in terms of strategic or diplomatic partnerships. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the Sahel region, for more than a decade now, has been suffering a severe security crisis that jeopardizes the very existence of its states and which represents an ignominious attack on international peace and security. To present a united front against the common challenges that we are facing, especially security challenges, the three states led by their excellencies, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, Colonel Assimi Goïta, President of the Transition, Head of State of Mali, and Brigadier General Abdurrahman Tiani, President of the National Council for the Salvation of the Homeland, Head of State of Niger. Signed on September 16, 2023, the Liptako-Gourma Charter, thus establishing the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES. Today, we can see the strong support of the population as well as the military successes won on the ground by the AES defense and security forces in their battle against terrorism and crime. Here I would like to commend the creation of the unified force of the AES and the excellent coordination the units have demonstrated. I pay a sincere tribute to all of these civilian and military victims of the violence in the Sahel. Ladies and gentlemen, at the historic summit of the heads of state of the AES held in Niamey on July 6, 2024, the alliance became a confederation based on three pillars, namely defense and security, diplomacy, and development. This new strategic framework for integration has the ultimate goal of becoming a federation. It boasts a wealth of natural resources to attain its goals. This wealth has caught the covetous eye of certain Western powers, which are financing and arming terrorist groups in order to destabilize our countries. Niger reaffirms its strong condemnation of these hostile acts and rejects all forms of support for terrorism, especially the active and public support of Ukraine for the terrorist coalition that perpetrated a cowardly attack on Tinzaouaten in Mali. Here I also would like to condemn the subversive actions and new strategy of recolonization espoused and pursued by France, which trains, finances, arms, and provides intelligence to the terrorist groups of the Sahel. It provides food and lodging to its local lackeys, some of which occupy the diplomatic premises of Niger in Paris in flagrant violation of the Vienna Convention of 1961 on diplomatic relations. So far from halting the momentum underway in the Sahel, these attempts at destabilization are only strengthening our country's resolve to forge ahead as we pursue our goals. In spite of all these adversities, the AES caravan goes on. Mr. President, the Confederation of Sahel States is now, as much as some might be displeased by it, a new geopolitical deal which will fully play its role in the international arena while respecting the sovereignty and the freedom of choice of its partners, as stated by His Excellency Colonel Assimi Goïta, President of the Confederation of the AES, on the first anniversary of the alliance. Quote, "In our spirit of independence and regained sovereignty, we remain open to cooperation with brotherly and friendly peoples, based on fraternity and mutual respect." Ladies and gentlemen, on the national level, the inclusive vision of the President of the CNSP and Head of State, Brigadier General Abdurrahman Tiani, is based on 4 strategic pillars as follows: bolstering security and social cohesion, promoting good governance, developing production bases, and accelerating social reforms. These pillars aim to ensure the security, political, and socioeconomic sovereignty of our countries. They inform all of the actions of the state and its partners to pave the way for a structural transformation of the Nigerian economy and to improve the population's well-being. To guide this transformation, especially in the mining and oil sectors, my country is willing to sign partnership agreements with foreign investors based on the principle of win-win cooperation and while respecting the dignity of our peoples, which have until now been left behind. The goal is to make the Sahel a region of peace and prosperity, as affirmed by President Tiani. In closing, I would like to thank our brotherly countries, our friends, Burkina Faso, Mali, Togo, Morocco, Turkey, Russia, China, Iran, and all others who have supported Niger as it transforms itself. I would like to conclude by asking the diaspora of our countries, wherever they may be, to continue to pray for God to protect the AES, to protect our peoples and our governments. Long live solidarity between peoples. Long live the AES Confederation. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Cooperation, and Nigerian abroad of the Niger. I now give the floor to His Excellency Karamoko Jean-Marie Touare, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Regional Cooperation, and Burkina Faso abroad of Burkina Faso.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished delegates, I have the great privilege and the honor of conveying to you, on behalf of His Excellency Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, Head of State, the brotherly and friendly greetings of the valiant people of Burkina Faso, a people who, in the face of adversity, namely the heinous acts of aggressors and enemies of peace, machinations and interference in its many forms, a people that, in spite of all of the above, have developed a resilience to continue its glorious journey towards inclusive social and economic development. I'm also delighted to bring to you, on behalf of the people and government of Burkina Faso,